Excellent. Welcome to the call. My name is Leah Miller. I'm the Senior Regional Manager at Merit Travel, and I'm pleased to introduce Ted Barris and his wife Jane McAuley to the call. We will be presenting another one of Ted's tours that we are pleased to work with him on. We also have a couple of other guests. We have Ian Cowan and Melody will also be on the call, who will be assisting with the tour management throughout the from beginning to end of the tour. I won't talk much longer. I'm going to pass the microphone off to Ted, but we will have, if you can keep your, like Laura said, keep your mics on mute for now. We'll have questions at the end. Thank you very much. Welcome, Ted. Thank you.
Pleasure. Delight to reconnect with a lot of previous travelers on Merit tours and some newcomers. And I'll try to, as most of you know, there's not a microphone I never liked, so I'm gonna, and I love telling stories. I'm gonna try to limit the storytelling a little bit, but also give you a sense of making this trip not just kind of a race through Britain, dropping in on spots that had significance during the Second World War, but also trying to give you some sense of the roots of the stories by way of the people. Any of you who've been with Jane and me before know that it's the people stories that really give the Second World War, any wartime situation, a face. So we'll be making sure that that element is strong and very present in our travels. Um, the image you're looking at behind the hurricanes, for those of you who don't know, is the Canadian flag prior to 1964. We, as Canadians serving overseas, away from Canada, and indeed at home, fought and served under the Canadian ensign, which is the flag you're looking at as the backdrop to my presentation today. I just thought that would be appropriate. I originally put in the maple leaf, but then I thought, well, wait a minute, we better be accurate here and let's show the image of the flag that Canadians fought under. That's the tour date at the bottom. That image is a scramble. You're seeing men at 85 Squadron in the Battle of Britain and thereafter dashing to their hurricanes. That would probably be the full complement of the squadron fighting in the air over Britain in that period of the battle, the 113 days of the Battle of Britain from July the 10th to October the 31st. And the dates here, as you can probably determine or figure, we will be in Britain for this tour during the period leading up to the actual anniversary of the battle. Battle, as I said, 113 days, but the climax was September the 15th, 1940. And so all of this period that will be in Britain will be the period known as Battle of Britain Sunday. And I've lost control of the images here, so I'm going to have to stop for a second and reshare. And then we'll have control of it, I hope, again. Okay, this is a little bit of background on me if you are curious. Um, the book that is most recent in my repertoire is a book that came out last September called Battle of Britain, Canadian Airmen in Their Finest Hour. And if you have a chance to read it, you'll get a really strong introduction to the kind of stories that and locations that we'll be visiting, at least in the front half of the tour. Jane and I have done 20, 25 tours over the course of the last 20 or so years with Merit. And this is an exciting one that Ian and Melody and Jane and I concocted a few months ago. We thought the combination of Ian's knowledge of some of the Bomber Command and American base history and mine of the Dam Busters and the Battle of Britain would make a wonderful combination for a tour. So that's giving you a bit of a heads up as to where we're headed. We'll start off our tour as we always do, gathering those of you who won't be joining us at Pearson, having made your own way to Britain prior to our trip, and that's certainly an option. All you have to do is check with your Merit travel agent to make sure that any travel plans you have in advance or after are handled so that we connect properly. We leave on the Sunday evening, and we're invited to go to a lounge at Pearson to gather and have a meal, relax a little bit in the hours prior to the flight, and then we fly out overnight, arriving in Britain, in London, at Heathrow on Monday morning to start off the week. And the first thing we're going to do is going to make sure we get all our luggage and maybe have a short break to grab a breakfast meal as we're assembling. We get aboard our coach and we're going to head off to one of the most famous museums for aviation artifacts in Britain, and that's the one at RAF Hendon. It was a station in the First World War and right through the Second World War, right on the north edge of London. It was in the heat of things during the Battle of Britain. These are a couple of images of the current look of the museum. There are 6 hangars at the museum full of aircraft dating back to the earliest days of flight and right on through to the Second World War. And we're going to kind of make the first day not too complicated, fairly straightforward. There's going to be some walking around the museum because you've got to do some walking to get to the 6 hangars. And it's not going to be an intense guided tour within the museum. We'll still be recovering a little bit from jet lag, so everyone will have the opportunity to go at their own speed through the hangars. We'll give you lots of time and enjoy that introduction to some of the great artifacts that are available to see in a museum like this, as well as the stories, great depictions, and so on. And then we wrap up the first day after the visit to Hendon. We go to our lodgings in London and we have the traditional welcome supper. This is a great way for us all to get together over a meal. For those who've not met each other, a chance to meet and make new friends. And for a lot of us who've been traveling together before, a chance to catch up, relax, enjoy a meal, and begin to share stories about why this is such a significant trip for us all. And before I go any further, one of the things I always invite is to make sure that if you've got stories, family connections, some connection to the Battle of Britain and or Bomber Command stories in any part of the war, because we'll be getting beyond the Battle of Britain to Bomber Command as well, make sure that I'm aware of them, that Jane and I are aware of them, so that we can encourage you to bring artifacts, flight logs, photographs, correspondence, any elements that will help all of us on the tour understand that much more about what we're seeing. So after we've done the sort of first day of acclimatizing, we'll get some rest. And then our first real day of moving around and getting our tour underway is a tour around London. We won't be making a lot of stops. Again, we're easing you into the intensity of the travel. This is an image you're seeing of St. Paul's in the middle of the Blitz. And we're going to be in London literally within days of the first day of the Blitz, September the 7th, 1940, when the Luftwaffe bombers changed their targets from those in South England down towards the coast to a very intensive, almost carpet bombing of London. And you'll see sites that survived or were repaired as we travel around that day and visit locations aboard a Blitz bus. Um, in addition to the sort of sightseeing, we will actually, I hope, stop at the St. Clement Danes Church. This is a church that contains wartime memorabilia and insignia. Um, and we'll pass by Tower of London and HMS Belfast. She was a Battle of the Atlantic, including all the way to across the North Cape to Russia during the Second World War. Um, but we'll also be making a couple of stops, one of which is probably one of the busiest locations for wartime visits in London, and that's the Cabinet War Rooms. When Jane and I first went there many years ago, it was just, in fact, the war rooms where the cabinet met, Churchill and his inner circle of commanders and cabinet ministers meeting 3, 4, 5 stories underground. What happened in the interim between then and now is that the cabinet war rooms, which are still preserved exactly as they were in the earliest days of the war, and then on through the rest of the war, the museum has expanded underground and it's actually become the official Churchill Museum. So, as part of our stop there, not only will you have the chance to go through the cabinet war rooms and get a real sense of how Churchill and the cabinet and his uh, commanding officers collaborated and consulted each other underground, but also a museum which really explores Churchill's life, his legacy, his extraordinary speeches, and wonderful artifacts that you wouldn't expect to find involving Churchill's life. And then after we've done that, one other stop will allow us to get, or two others, I should say. We'll go to the edge of Green Park, which is across from Buckingham Palace, and visit the very controversial Bomber Command Memorial. I say controversial because it took the better part of three-quarters of a century for this memorial to occur. Bomber Command was under a lot of criticism in the years after the war, particularly in the 60s and 70s, for the losses and the devastation that Bomber Command unleashed on occupied Europe. But cooler heads prevailed, and it was certainly important that Bomber Command veterans and those who sacrificed their lives. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of crew, ground crew, and pilots in Bomber Command, and the losses substantial. This memorial is just an incredible achievement, both emotionally and architecturally in the downtown London area. You'll see at the top of that image there a crisscross ceiling. That ceiling is actually directly connected to Bomber Command. It's constructed of alloy which was melted down from aircraft that either were scrapped or destroyed during the Second World War bomber aircraft, Lancasters and Halifaxes and so on. And that alloy was then reshaped into the inner ceiling above the Bomber Command Memorial. And it's an incredible visit. You're looking at an image with air crew, the traditional air crew members, of pilot, navigator, flight engineer, gunners, bomb aimers, and so on, at about twice life size or thereabouts. And then we'll finish our round the London trip by making a stop along the Westminster Embankment. This will show you this fabulous relief of the Battle of Britain Memorial, which is only fairly recent in its construction in London, but it contains the names of the 2,700 or so air crew and ground crew who participated in the Battle of Britain. We'll have a chance to get some photographs. It's right along the Thames. It's really a fabulous spot. And this, again, is a little bit larger than life size. And then we'll head off to our lodgings and begin day 2 or 4, our second day in the London area.
That's not our lodging.
That's not, yeah, Jane points out that's not our lodgings. That's actually the entrance to a bunker, which is known as the Battle of Britain bunker, and it's in a place called Uxbridge, which is um, a, a suburb of London. And it was here that the eyes of the RAF brought their vision. And by that I mean the images that were projected from the chain home towers and then transmitted by WAF, Women's Auxiliary Air Force personnel, at the foot of those towers to this plotting room, allowed the RAF underground, and Churchill used to sit in that perch on the left-hand side at the top, watching the day's proceedings, while the RAF fighter command commanders sat to the right, and they were able to see each battle as it unfolded underground. And they would, as they monitored the inbound German squadrons of bombers coming to Britain and being plotted on that map, they would then scramble the fighter squadrons, 48 of them across South England, to go up and meet the bombers and attempt to dissuade them, break up their inbound formations, or knock down as many as they could. This was Hugh Dowding's strategy, was to try to essentially destroy the bombers, not go after the fighters. The Messerschmitts flying at a higher altitude. Had he'd done that, had they gone off to do that, the battle might have been over much more quickly and in favor of the Germans because the British were outnumbered 3-1 in terms of aircraft at this point. But we'll get into all the details as we travel. One of the neat things that we're also going to do at that bunker is we're going to hear the story. It's one of my favorites, both in terms of the research and writing of my book, but also in my search for photographs. This photograph shows a man named John Kent, second man from the left. He was an just average, run-of-the-mill Manitoban, fell in love with flying in the 30s, almost didn't survive his solo, but manages to get his private pilot's license and becomes one of 118 Canadians off to Britain to follow up on what the RAF offered as direct entry into the RAF for those men who are qualified or capable. Johnny went, and he ends up serving with number 303 All Polish Squadron. And these are some of the Polish airmen with whom he served. It's a great story. I'll share many of the anecdotes that I found in Johnny Kent's memoirs about this great association that he had with the Poles, not the least of which was when he arrived there in the spring of 1940, not any one of those men with whom he's walking there understood a word of English. So it was his job to train them, and we'll talk more about that too. And what makes this all the more interesting is in my search for photographs, this one included, I met a man named Wojciech Daluga. And Wojciech is with the Polish Institute and Sikorsky Museum in London, and he will join us at the bunker that day and tell us about the extraordinary bond that existed between the Poles and the Canadians during the Battle of Britain. He will join us there. Um, on Wednesday, day 4, after we've done our stop at Uxbridge, we'll then head out of town and move to the south coast where we'll visit Biggin Hill and Tangmere, two of the legendary, this is Biggin Hill with the chapel as well, two of the legendary Battle of Britain stations, still very much the way they were during the battle itself. We'll get a chance to visit with some of the experts who have helped to preserve the history, very much volunteer oriented, these places. And so their hearts are really in it. We'll get a wonderful sense of how they've managed to save the aircraft, the artifacts, and the stories of aircrew. And then we're going to make our way after our visit to Biggin Hill and Tangmere on to Hastings. Ian, I don't know whether you want to expound a little bit on the short stop we're going to make with regard to DCI Chris Foyle. Are you there, Ian? He's recovering from dental surgery, so he
Yeah,
may be. There he is.
I'm mumbling away here. Sorry, not my usual issue. Yeah, on the way to Hastings, it's you can go to the front door of where it was all filmed. It's going to be so any Falls War fans, you're going to get quite a bit out of it too. Um, Hastings itself is a wonderful town as well. There's not a lot I can add to that. I'm sorry. It's do me best here.
That's okay. You're doing fine. You're doing fine. Okay. Next day, day 5, we're going to head farther out of the London area down to an area in Kent, which became known as Hellfire Corner. And that's because on the south coast of England, this was where a number of very important aspects of the Battle of Britain occurred, not the least of which was this was the intended area where Hitler planned to land his amphibious invasion of Britain along this coast. Here's the map showing you Operation Seelöwe, Sea Lion, which called for the transport of nearly 300,000 German troops across the English Channel, landing in this area and a little bit to the west along the south coast of England in a matter of days. This, of course, was all contingent on the Luftwaffe's destruction of the RAF. Not one barge could leave France en route for England, according to Hitler's plan, until the RAF was wiped from the sky, which Goering promised would happen in 4 weeks. But coincidentally, in addition to this location, because of its geographic proximity to the coast of France, is not only the hot corner, the Hellfire Corner for the Battle of Britain, but it's also the location, and we hope to visit it, where in the Dover Castle we'll see the headquarters for Operation Dynamo. Operation Dynamo, of course, precedes Hitler's Operation Sea Lion, because Dynamo was the evacuation of all of the Expeditionary Force troops from Dunkirk. And the operation was essentially organized in the tunnels beneath Dover Castle by the then commanding officer of the Navy, and his name is just Ramsey.
Mm.
Um, he essentially spearheaded the dispatching of the Royal Navy ships and the people's ships, the thousands of ships that went out to assist the Royal Navy in retrieving the evacuating troops from France. But this was going to be the location where, on or about September the 15th, Battle of Britain Sunday, as it turned out, this was going to be the date that Hitler invaded um, England and all of the British Isles, had the Luftwaffe erase the RAF from the skies, which of course we know didn't happen. Here's a bit of audio and video to give you a sense of what that moment was like. I hope you can hear the audio here.
July 1940. The German armies that have conquered Europe are preparing to cross the English Channel and invade Britain. But to win the Battle of Britain, the Germans must have command of the air. They must destroy Britain's Royal Air Force. With no air force, Britain will be defenseless. Now Britain's last line of defense are the fighter pilots. Flying with the Royal Air Force and with the Royal Canadian Air Force are more than 100 Canadians.
A couple of really interesting points about what you're looking at. We forget, although not if you've read Winston Churchill's famous line about the Battle of Britain, that never in the course of human conflict had so much been owed by so many to so few. The few were the airmen who flew these single cockpit, single engine, mono-wing fighter aircraft. These are Spitfires, and of course the others that were their sister aircraft from Hawker Hurricanes, the Hawker Hurricanes. This was essentially the defense of Britain in this 113-day battle. The men who flew and the ground crew who kept those aircraft in the air. And we, Canadians, as I emphasize many times in my presentation, and you'll hear me repeat many times on our trip, Canadians were the second largest contingent in the Battle of Britain. Most Canadians don't realize that. There were New Zealanders, there were Czechs, there were Poles, there were even some Americans, but the Canadians were the second largest after the Britons in the Battle of Britain. In any case, that also gives you a strong sense of that movement. You see the animation you saw a moment ago of the barges that would deliver the German troops to England. And again, that area in Kent, Hellfire Corner. This is a look at the Hawkinge Museum, which is along that coast, and we'll visit it, full of artifacts. The one thing that I was surprised to learn was that more than 600 aircraft were downed over the Kent coastline and inland. 600, which meant that the museum had plenty of pickings from which to build their artifacts for the museum. We'll see some of the restored aircraft as well as the remains of many others. And then we'll travel to a really neat spot a little farther along the coastline. This is the important Battle of Britain Memorial out there in the open overlooking the sea. Really interesting sculpture. And you can see by the light there behind in this shot how remarkable it is. This is at Capelle Le Fern on our way to Dover Castle. Day 6, we leave the coastline and we head inland. And we go up into Norfolk County, and we go to this air station called Thorpe Abbotts. And it was the home during the Second World War of the 100th United States Army Air Force Bomb Group, otherwise known as the Bloody 100th. And they flew data operations between June 1943 and the end of the war. And of course, this is the location made famous by the miniseries that came out last year, Masters of the Air. I have not been there, but Ian has, and you will get a sense from what Ian describes. Just give us a bit of a thumbnail of what we're going to see there, Ian. I've got a couple more images here to show. This shows one of the sort of replica of the mess area within the station. and the very important control tower at Thorpe Abbotts.
Come off mute here. It's fascinating. This whole area of East Anglia and Norfolk is fascinating. But this is pretty iconic. This airfield. It's simply because the Bloody 100th was called that because it goes back to one of the earlier missions where one of the B-17s was coming back and it was being ghosted by ME 109 basically, and it was told to lower its guns for surrender. And it did lower its guns, but as the ME 109 got closer, it opened up again and they came back. And after that, the Luftwaffe focused very much on the 100th 8th Army Air Force Bomber Group. Sorry. But it's absolutely fascinating because the control tower is as it was, and they use some of the ancillary huts and so forth as part of the museum. We're going to try and do a couple of other visits as well on the way to the to Cambridge, because Cambridge was the epicenter for all the air crews that were able to get into that were able to get in and around there. And close there's of course the only American cemetery there, which is at Madingley, and that's where a lot of the bomber crews are laid to rest there. And it's and there's a picture of it right there. It's pretty fascinating to go there as well. So Madingley is just outside of Cambridge. I used to cycle there as a little kid, you know, thinking just amazing to see some of the sculptures there and the honor that they gave to the fallen. So it's quite remarkable.
The image you see on the left is that of Bill Tutt, not a Canadian-born participant of the Second World War, but he became a Canadian afterwards. Jane and I encountered his story when we were traveling in 2016, I think, when we were, no, it was, I think it was in our 2019. In any case, doesn't matter. The neat thing about Bill Tutt, he was one of that enclave of extraordinary minds at Bletchley Park, the mathematicians who were just a family, as they were described, the great minds of the United Kingdom brought together at Bletchley, and Bill Tutt was what was known as a combinatoric expert, a combinatorics expert. He was a mathematician, and he had the job of essentially assisting the decoders at Bletchley determine how they could break down the codes and therefore to interpret the messages that were being sent from high command in Berlin to the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force on the German side. And he's responsible, Bill is, for helping to break the workings or interpret the workings of a system called Lorenz, which was a teletype system the Germans used. This is, of course, when teletype was, nobody had ever heard of it. And Bill was involved in the decoding or breaking of the teletype data. And the reason we're going to Newmarket will leave as a bit of a secret because it's a wonderful surprise when we get there. So that's another of the stops on our way to Hastings. Okay, day 7. This is one of the climaxes of the tour because this is where we're going to see not static, not sort of imaginary aircraft circulation, but the real thing, the genuine articles in the air. Every year, Duxford has a number of air shows, and because this is the 85th anniversary of the Battle of Britain, they're going to have everything in the air that day that you can imagine, from fighter aircraft to bombers, and probably a lot of aircraft not necessarily just associated with the Second World War. But you can see by the size of that building, if you've never been to Duxford before, it's immense. It takes you half an hour, 45 minutes to walk across the station. And this is the nature of their collection. It's massive. And you'll see a lot of air replication of the dogfights and the formation flying and all the rest of it.
Just a note on that, Ted. That's also Duxford is where Douglas Bader was with Canadians at 12 Group, correct?
That's right. He was their home base was a base called Northolt, but
Mm.
when they got no Coltishall, when they got the nod every day to go to battle, and of course Botter was eager to get from his group north of London, and not necessarily every day involved directly in the defense of London. When they got their chance, they gathered at Duxford closer to the action and waited for the scramble call. So it happened at Duxford all through the Battle of Britain. And in addition to that, and we'll tell you lots more about the Douglas Bader connection to Canada and the Canadians in 242 Squadron. It's also where many of the scenes for the Battle of Britain movie, filmed in 1968 and premiered the next year, took place. Lots of background there. And if any of the scenes you remember from the movie, and I would strongly suggest you have a chance, view the movie before we go, so that they'll be in your mind's eye when we see the locations, and you'll be able to see where these shots were taken as they replicated the battle at Duxford on film. Um, in addition to the American story with U.S. Army Air Force 100th Bomb Group, we're going to take you deeper into the British countryside, into Yorkshire and Lincolnshire, sorry, Lincolnshire, where Bomber Command and particular 6 Group was located. 6 Group being the group largely made up of Canadian squadrons, Canadians in the RCAF, the 400 series squadrons. And we will spend a couple of days here exploring not just Bomber Command as an umbrella story, but some of the stories that are connected, in particular in Lincolnshire, with a special operation. I'll get to that in a second. Um, when Jane and I went with our first group to Britain, exploring uh, the Lincolnshire area and Yorkshire area where the Canadians launched their night operations, we discovered this place, the International Bomber Command Center, and it was very new then. It was still twinkling. It was so new. It was just it still is, but it continues to update and upgrade its contents. It has, I think, the largest digital Bomber Command database in the world. And you can input information that maybe they don't have about Canadians whose stories you're bringing to make sure that they're included there, or you can search out data. But the interior of that building that you're seeing, in addition to the database, has one of the most remarkable experiences in a Bomber Command museum that I've ever experienced. Do you want to talk about the holographs?
No.
Okay. When you go in, and you're not only captivated by lots of the dioramas and the glass cases, I think there's even in the museum there might even be a replica of Barnes Wallis's office. He's the man who invented the bouncing bomb. In any case, what's fabulous is, in addition to the things that are fairly static, suddenly as you're walking through the museum, you're faced with holograms, people who pop out in mid space and are your height and right in front of you, and their air crew and their medical officers and their nurses and their farmers and their citizens of Lincolnshire, right there in front of you, telling you their story. It's like you're meeting them in person. It's just remarkable. And so that will be one of the places we will visit on Sunday to get a sense of, again, the way the history has been gathered in that location. Outside the International Bomber Command Center is a wonderful garden, and it's dominated by this spire. It's 102 feet high, specifically the same height as the wingspan of a Lancaster is wide. And then across the grounds in their garden, there are 27 different trees, each of them located as a geographic replica of the way the stations across Lincolnshire were built during the time of the Bomber Command operations from Lincolnshire and Yorkshire to occupied Europe. And then adjacent to the spire are walls. You can just see them in a semicircular pattern around the spire. And on those walls are the 57,205 names of air crew who died in the operations over occupied Europe. And it's bare now, but when you go there, you'll find poppies and plaques and memorabilia and artifacts scattered along and attached to the wall where families have come to remember their lost relatives and friends. It's quite moving, and it's a gorgeous location. And you can't see it there, but from the spire off to the left, if you stand where the museum and the spire are, it's a view straight downtown to downtown Lincoln, and it's tremendous skyline, including the cathedral.
Which was a beacon for them.
And we'll get to that in a second. One of the things that we're going to do on the Sunday, in addition to visiting the International Bomber Command Center, is we're going to take a trip out of Lincolnshire. I had hoped we would get to Scampton, which was where the 617 Squadron launched its famous Dams raid. But they've closed it and all the artifacts are gone. So we can't actually see that. However, one of the neat things connected to the Dam Buster raid is the fact that we'll get a chance to see one of the locations they trained over. But before we do that, I'm getting ahead of myself here. This is a shot of the only time since the Second World War when the only two airworthy Lancaster bombers met in close proximity. This is a still, and there's plenty of video around for you to look at, of Vera, the Lancaster that came from the Canadian Warplane Heritage Museum in Hamilton, and Thumper, the one that travels with the Battle of Britain commemorative flight. And the two of them were flying around Britain in that summer about 8 or 10 years ago. And these are some of the shots. But what's neat is there are several other Lancasters around, and we're going to visit one that's on the ground at a place called the Lincolnshire Aviation Center, and that's Just Jane. She's another of the Lancasters, and she doesn't fly, but she taxis. And you'll get a chance to see their museum. It too has a tremendous volume and array of artifacts and a cafe and all the rest of that, very period oriented. But you'll get a strong sense to get up close to another of the Lancasters that's been restored at East Kirkby for you to touch and perhaps even climb aboard, depending on the time and availability and so on. At the end of that day, on the Sunday, we will retire to one of Jane's and my favorite in all the world hotels, the Petwood. And doesn't it look fabulous? These are the gardens around Petwood. We went there to sort of case the place out in the summertime before we took our first group in October of 2019. And it looks as fabulous inside as it does outside. And the reason it has particular significance is not only is it gorgeous and a wonderful hotel, which we'll stay at for a couple of nights, it's the location that was chosen and offered by the family that owned this wonderful estate to the officers of the Dam Buster Squadron that had just completed its raids on the dams on the Ruhr Valley. And we will stay there at the Petwood. In the Petwood, in addition to its fabulous amenities, is a very famous bar. It's the Dam Buster Bar, the 617 bar, and it has an extraordinary array of artifacts, citations, photographs, and even chunks of that have artifacts that have direct connection to the dams raid are all in the Dam Buster Bar at the Petwood. And as Jane pointed out, one of the views from the Bomber Command Center down into the city of Lincoln is this extraordinary cathedral, which you can see from everywhere. I didn't realize it till I checked the other day. It was actually the home to the Magna Carta for a while, which is what, 15th century? And then this, well, it couldn't be. It would have to be before it'd be after the 11th century when the cathedral was built. And we're going to visit what makes it an extraordinary place, obviously because of its connection to the Church of England and its spiritual value, but for the Canadian bomber crews who had been flying all night in the darkness and having survived the raids over Britain in the darkness to come home in the early morning hours and see ahead of them the spires of the cathedral, the Lincoln Cathedral. It was like a beacon for them, getting them home back to their stations across the Lincolnshire countryside. And we'll visit not just the cathedral, but inside the Airmen's Chapel, which has a lot of artifacts and wonderful connection, illustrating the community's connection to not just the Canadians, but all the members of Bomber Command. There's the cathedral there, or there's the chapel there. There's lots to see there. The reference to Bomber Command's 617 Squadron, these are the men involved under Guy Gibson, their squadron leader for the nighttime attack on the dams of the Ruhr Valley. 133 air crew were involved in 19 Lancasters in the raid. And of course, they became, because of their raid on the 16th and 17th of 1943, known as the Dam Busters. This is Guy Gibson on the right in this photograph, and standing with him are his crew. They're about to board their Lancaster, altered for the dams raid. And the man on the ladder is Terry Terham, who was the lead navigator for the operation from a small town in Alberta. And one of his gunners came from Coldwater, Ontario, in that group as well. So even though we can't go to Scampton to see Guy Gibson's old office and where they buried his dog and some of the artifacts connected with the base at Scampton, we're going to travel out from Lincoln, and we're going to go north and west to a place called the Derwent Dam. And this is a photograph of a more recent, this is Thumper, flying over the airworthy Lancaster in Britain, flying over the Derwent Dam. The air crews, all 133 men in the 20 or so Lancasters, had to do daytime, and nighttime rehearsals around a course over Britain in their practice for the raid on the dams, not ever knowing what the targets were. In other words, from March the 31st, when all crew gathered at Scampton to train and prepare for the secret operation, not one of them knew what the target was. They found out on May the 16th, the day of the operation, what the target was. But as they practiced, they flew over this dam, this reservoir and dam, in rehearsing their low-level runs over water. And they actually did target practice, dropping the dummy bombs, the spinning bomb, at the dam. Some of the men in the crews thinking that their targets would be the Tirpitz, which was harbored in a fjord in Norway. Some of them thinking that they might be attacking other naval targets because they were flying over water with their rehearsals. What they didn't realize until the 16th was that the flight they would be making at the Mona and Ader dams on the Ruhr River Valley looked almost exactly, when they got there, like the dam that they were rehearsing over. And we will visit it, the Derwent Dam, north and west of Sheffield. And we'll also go to a really neat little pub in the area for lunch. This is a sketch of the attacks on the Mona and the Ader. And you can see the tower in the distance. The towers on the Mona Dam were almost exactly the same distance apart as they were in the Derwent. So it was a perfect rehearsal area for the crews in their attacks. On the day 9, after we've gone to the Derwent, we're going to pay a special visit to a little cemetery almost lost in the countryside of Britain. The Commonwealth War Graves Commission has war graves all across Europe, and of course in Britain as well. This one is very small. There aren't that many graves in it. But when we went there, Jane and I were amazed to find and delighted to find the grave of the man buried here, John Gillespie McGee. And in case you don't know, he was the man who was British born in China, trained in Canada in the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan. I met the man who was his elementary flying training school instructor and interviewed him, not just about John Gillespie McGee, but about training aircrew. And he died over the United Kingdom in 1941 near Digby, the station that he was stationed at.
Age 19.
age 19. And it was in this period, as he was training and preparing for sorties over the English Channel and beyond, that he, as a writer, composed the iconic poem High Flight, which many of you will know. So we'll go to that tiny cemetery, pay our respects. On our last day, we will leave the North Country, Yorkshire and Lincolnshire, and head back south. And on our way, we'll go to an unassuming little estate near Milton Keynes. And here was housed the Government Code and Cipher School, later known as Bletchley Park. And this is, of course, the extraordinary place where the penetrating and decoding of messages on the Enigma machine were broken, and the information gleaned from the decoding handed across to the British Army, the British Navy, and the British Air Force to respond to German planning for their attacks and engagement. Most people don't realize that 10,000 people were under roofs of the Nissen huts and the other buildings at Bletchley Park, and the Germans had no idea that they were there. They dropped one bomb on the place by accident. This, what you see here, is one of the women working in the bombs room. This is a bomb, a BOMBE, is a primitive computer, and it helped to reduce the outcomes of the Enigma machine. When a German encoding expert typed on the keys of this typewriter, essentially, at the top of the typewriter were small wheels, which, when set in certain configurations, scrambled what you were typing on the machine. And each of those scrambled sequences was passed along or shared among the Germans communicating with each other, Army, Navy, Air Force. And the wheels would be set in a certain pattern depending on the configuration of that particular day, week, or month. And of course, the job of the Allies was to unscramble the encoding of those messages on that machine, the Enigma, and the bomb in the background helped to reduce what would have been a million potential outcomes of the coding of those messages to fewer than a million, so that people like Alan Turing and Bill Tutt and the women who were working at Bletchley Park, two of whom I've met, and Jane and I have met, and I'll share with you the stories of their experiences there. You get a strong sense of how vital this incredible place was that the Germans had no idea was going on there. Well, this is, in addition to visiting the Bletchley Park Cipher School, we'll also go to the north end of the school to a little building which houses the very first programmable computer. There it is on the right there with a picture of Tommy Flowers. Tommy was one of the co-inventors of this original computer, and it's still functioning today, 85 years later, on the same tubes, the Brits call them valves, on the same tubes virtually that it was functioning on in 1940. And we'll get a chance to go into and visit Colossus. That's the name of the computer, still functioning. Our last stop of the trip will be later that same day when we come south back to London, and on the outskirts, we drop into Runnymede, which is a fabulous memorial perched on the edge of the Thames near Heathrow. And it's here where, like the Menin Gate in Ypres, the names of Air Force crew losses, men and women for whom there are no known graves, are registered, 116,000 names or so, on the walls of Runnymede. You can see the number, and it's all around the interior. There's a beautiful garden there, and we hope to get there in time to get a chance to spend some time going through some of the locations, the walls. Like all of the Commonwealth Grave Commission's locations, there are guides. If you have a name that you're looking for, it'll be registered in the guidebook at the entry, and it'll take you to the column, the pole, the wall, wherever, where that name is engraved, and you'll be able to go to it and pay your respects, as we all do. And then after our visit to Runnymede, we'll return to our hotel for the one night prior to departure home in the London area for our farewell dinner. And then we take all of the images that are in our heads and our hearts and our cell phones and make our way to the airport and head home on Wednesday, September the 10th. And that's our trip. Any questions?
Exactly. That's just what I was going to say.
What airline would be flying out on?
Oh my gosh. Did we, I believe we have a block on Air Canada.
Yes, you do.
I believe
We
it is Air
do, thank
Canada.
you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Okay.
we got it. Now we just have to get to the last two slides.
Yeah, it would be in and out of Heathrow.
Yes. And again, if you're interested in going a little bit earlier or extending your stay at all, we can definitely assist it with that as well.
Yeah, if I can add too that there's an awful lot you can add on at the beginning. I mean, what we're trying to do is basically show you the best of everything possible. But as probably many of you know, there are other suggestions that we can have as well, that places you may want to visit and so forth, pre or post, because Heathrow is pretty easy to get to all the other sites and so forth. So
Absolutely.
pre or post is probably a good idea.
Absolutely. So the inclusions in the tour obviously would be our host, Ted Barris, and as well as Ian Cowan, who is with Connection Tours, and he is going to make sure everything runs tickety-boo and keeps Ted in line, or maybe Ted keeps Ian in line. I'm not sure. They have a little shtick happening here, so we'll see what happens. They work very well together. We will be providing Plaza Premium Lounge passes for you at Pearson Airport. If you're flying out from a different city, it really depends on the city because they're not necessarily at every airport, but they are 3-hour lounge passes. There's no expiry date, so if you don't use it this time, you can use it another time. Round trip flights, direct flights, 10 nights of accommodations. We have the executive coach, your entrance fees as described in the itinerary, and also your taxes and gratuities are included.
And most important, we have secured tickets for the Battle of Britain Air Show at Duxford, which is in high demand. So we've secured tickets for that because I was there for the 70th anniversary and also for the 60th. And it's a not to be missed occasion. It's amazing. The last time I was there, they had 16 Spitfires take off at one time. So it's a pretty
Wow.
exciting venue. Yeah.
Thank you, Ian.
So the inclusive cost would be $68.95 per person based on double occupancy. So that's two people sharing a room. The single supplement to have your own room would be $1,600 in addition to the above cost. And sometimes we have single people that are traveling that are willing to share, and we have done that on previous tours. So we are also open to that. And so if you are interested, we will send you a registration form that we would love you to fill out, that we will address. If you have a particular merit consultant that you're dealing with, just add her name onto the form. And also, we will contact you with any further, if we have any further questions.
Yep. I'll add that link to the email that's sent out.
Oh, perfect. Okay, that's excellent. And that's basically all that we have. Our toll-free number is listed on this slide, but I'd like to open it up to any further questions or comments that anybody may want to express.
Don't hesitate. Fire
Don't be
away.
shy.
Thank you for the presentation. It was very, very nice. Thank you.
Thank you, whoever
Excellent.
that was.
Chris.
That was
Thanks,
Chris.
Chris. Appreciate it. I mean, and the nice thing about this trip, as is the case in the previous trip that Ian and I and Jane have done together, is that I don't know everything, not even close, but anything I don't know, Ian knows. So when he's got the gauze and crap out of his mouth from his dental surgery, we'll unleash him to tell you all the stuff he knows. And I'm being facetious, but to be quite genuine, Ian's knowledge of certainly of the wartime history in Britain is just a terrific addition to this trip because, for example, as you probably were aware, he's been to Thorpe Abbott's. I have not. He's been to and spent time as a kid and since then in Cambridge and Hastings. So all the elements that make it grounded and very familiar and kind of homey. And I mean that in a respectful way. And it's there because it's part of his background, and it's his family and families he knew lived this.
Well, it's amazing the combined wealth of knowledge between Ted and Ian. I don't feel that there'll be a dull moment on the tour. There'll be
No,
various
we've
facts,
got Ken Mist with us. How could it be dull?
right? I've heard about Ken. He's a little bit of a wild card, is he? Also, I wanted to note, and I meant to mention it earlier, Audrey, she's on the call but not speaking on the call today, but um, she will also be joining the group as well as the group in May. So we will have a merit representative helping out, making things a little bit easier for everyone. So you'll be well taken care of, and um, we look forward to hearing from you if you have anything further. Um, and ready to book.
Yeah, I don't
Uh,
think we don't, it's, I think Ted covered everything so well that we don't have any questions today.
that's amazing. That's
Well, the
amazing.
other thing that I would add, and for those of you who've not been on our tours before, and I'm coming back to a point I made early on, and that is that we welcome um, the addition of the stories that you might have connected to this story. It's very possible, and I will phone all of you before we leave to get a better sense of why you've decided to join, if you do, what brings you to this kind of a trip. And maybe there are stories along the way, and maybe even locations that will pass by that have relevance for your wanting to go. Ian and I and Jane are really flexible. If we find ourselves en route somewhere and there's a cemetery or a monument or some reference that has a deep wonderful connection for you and you've never been there before and we can stop, please let us know. I mean, we can't stop for everything, but maybe along the way, and I'd hate for us to find out later that we passed by a location that was tremendously important to you and we didn't take the time to do it because we try to do that. We've done that on the trip that we did in Normandy, and it was great fun to be able to share experiences that came up serendipitously in the days leading up to the tour. And just to give you a small example, um, one of the groups that joined us, and I say groups because there were three of them, we had Toronto firefighters, retired firefighters, um, Al Thomas, um, Paul Moffat, and Bill Stewart join us. And they are all retired firefighters. But in addition to that, they took time during the pandemic to initiate an extraordinary pursuit, and that is they went looking for the stories of firefighters in Canada who left their civilian jobs to serve overseas in either the Great War or the Second World War and died overseas and are buried in cemeteries there. We stopped at several locations, including Vimy, where some of those men were commemorated. And it was an addition to the tour that I cannot even begin to tell you was tremendously moving to have that component. Um, Chris, you were there for that. Uh,
Yes.
Ken, you remember that. We can talk about these moments, these stories, these people, but suddenly when uh, people who bring their stories with them and show us who they were, what they did. It all makes this thing so much more enriching. So I encourage you to join us in the gathering of stories and sharing of them on the tour, if that's at all clear.
Excellent. So If there are no more questions, we just want to thank you for joining our call. Thank you, Ted and Ian, for taking the time. Ian, with your pain and surgery, we really appreciate the effort. And Ted,
That's
always,
all in a day's work.
it's always all in a day's work. That's the travel industry for you.
Actually,
So,
before you hang up, Ted, is it okay to call you in about 5 minutes, or
Yes.
should I wait
Yep.
about 5
Yeah,
minutes?
yeah, give me a couple of minutes to sort out through the debris here on my desk. Thanks.
Thank you.
awesome.
And Chris and I are talking about something completely separate. If you want to reach me, you can get a hold of me. Jot down this number, our landline in Uxbridge. Grab a pen and paper if you want to call me about any of the stories I referred to, or you'd like to know more about. My number is 905 852 9691, and glad to try to answer questions, or to, if you maybe want to share a story with me that might help us, as I say, add to the tour, things that we hadn't expected. 905 852 9691. Please don't hesitate to call.